Stephen Hawking, The Mind Beyond Time and Space. Part 1. The Boy from Oxford. The cold winds of war still echoed across Europe in 1942 when, in the calm academic city of Oxford, a child was born. A child who, unbeknownst to the world, would one day reshape our understanding of time itself. His name was Stephen William Hawking, and his birth took place on the 8th of January, 1942, exactly 300 years after the death of Galileo Galilei. This poetic coincidence would later become a footnote in the life of a man who defied cosmic odds. His parents, Frank and Isabel Hawking, were intellectuals. Frank had studied medicine at Oxford and was a noted tropical disease researcher, while Isabel had studied philosophy, politics, and economics. They were not wealthy, but they were thinkers, and they nurtured a home where curiosity bloomed. They were also eccentric in their own right. Dinner table conversations often included long silences, with each family member buried in a book. The Hawkings' car was a rickety old London taxi, and their house, cluttered with books and journals, felt more like a scholar's lair than a home. But in this unconventional environment, young Stephen thrived. Early signs of brilliance. From a young age, Stephen showed signs of unusual intelligence, not through test scores or school discipline, but through the way he saw the world. He had a passion for building things, model trains, elaborate contraptions, and even rudimentary computers made from recycled electronics. While his grades at St. Albans School were not spectacular, teachers noticed something different. He had a calm, almost detached demeanor. He would sit quietly during discussions, only to interject with a single insight that revealed a deeper understanding than anyone else in the room. But Stephen wasn't obsessed with being a model student. He once joked, "My classmates called me Einstein, though I didn't particularly excel." What he did love was solving problems, not just equations, but puzzles about the nature of the universe. Why does time only move forward? What lies inside a black hole? What happened before the Big Bang? These weren't just childish daydreams. For Stephen, they were glimpses into something far more meaningful. The making of a scientist. In 1959, at just 17 years old, Stephen earned a scholarship to University College, Oxford, to study physics. Despite his father's wish that he pursue medicine, Stephen's heart was set on the stars. Oxford was where the boy truly began to evolve into the man. He wasn't the most dedicated student in terms of hours spent studying, but he was intensely curious and naturally gifted. He once completed a final exam with such elegance and confidence that his professors, unable to categorize his performance, had to deliberate whether to award him a first-class or second-class degree. They asked him directly. Stephen replied, half-jokingly, "If you give me a second, I'll stay at Oxford. If you give me a first, I'll go to Cambridge." He got the first, and he went to Cambridge. Cambridge, a new universe opens. In 1962, Hawking began his graduate work in cosmology at Trinity Hall, Cambridge, under the mentorship of Dennis Sciama, one of the founding fathers of modern cosmology. There, the boundaries of the known universe became his intellectual playground. It was at Cambridge that Stephen first began exploring Einstein's theory of general relativity and the large-scale structure of the universe. He was drawn to the mysteries of black holes, singularities, and the origin of the universe itself. But just as his academic journey was beginning to accelerate, his body began to betray him. The first signs of ALS. Stephen had always been somewhat physically awkward, not particularly athletic, a bit clumsy, occasionally falling or slurring his speech. But during his first year at Cambridge, these symptoms intensified. He fell on icy walkways, struggled to tie his shoes, and his speech became slower. A medical examination confirmed the worst. At just 21 years old, Stephen was diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. It was a degenerative motor neuron disease that would slowly rob him of control over his muscles. Doctors gave him a terrifying prognosis: 2 years to live. It was as if the universe itself, whose secret Stephen sought to understand, had turned against him. Facing the abyss, the diagnosis devastated him. For weeks he withdrew into isolation, his mind swirling with thoughts of death and purposelessness. What was the point of studying the cosmos if he wouldn't live long enough to share what he learned? But then something unexpected happened. He met Jane Wilde, a bright and hopeful young student of languages. Jane was radiant, optimistic, and full of life. Where Stephen saw the end of the road, Jane saw a challenge worth facing. They fell in love. Her faith in him and her unwavering belief that he had something extraordinary to offer the world pulled him out of his depression. Stephen later admitted that falling in love gave him a reason to live. He resumed his studies with renewed intensity. The mind awakens. Though his body was beginning to fail, Stephen's mind became sharper than ever. The impending limitations of his muscles forced him to visualize problems mentally rather than writing them out, an ability that would later become one of his greatest strengths. By 1965, just 3 years after his diagnosis, Stephen had completed his Ph.D. thesis, titled Properties of Expanding Universes. It explored the nature of singularity's points in space, where gravitational fields become infinite, and it laid the foundation for his lifelong pursuit, understanding the birth and structure of the cosmos. Later that year, he married Jane Wilde. Legacy in the making. By the age of 30, Stephen Hawking had already made a name for himself. His early work with Roger Penrose on the Hawking-Penrose singularity theorems rocked the scientific community. They proposed that the universe, if governed by Einstein's general relativity, must have begun from a singularity, a single point of infinite density and zero volume. This meant that time and space had a beginning, a radical idea at the time. More importantly, Hawking was no longer just a young mind battling a rare disease. He was becoming a force in theoretical physics, a man whose limbs may have been failing, but whose imagination had no boundaries. Closing of Part 1. As the 1970s dawned, Stephen Hawking sat in his motorized wheelchair, already visibly transformed by ALS, but his mind burned brighter than ever. The boy from Oxford had defied death, discovered love, and launched himself into the very heart of the cosmos. The universe had tried to silence him. Instead, it gave him a megaphone, and the world was only beginning to listen. Part 2. Discovering the Stars at Cambridge. Cambridge in the early 1960s was a place of quiet beauty, ancient colleges with ivy-clad walls, bustling courtyards echoing with the footsteps of scholars, and libraries heavy with the scent of knowledge. It was here, amid these timeless halls, that Stephen Hawking's mind soared far beyond Earth, toward the farthest reaches of the cosmos. Hawking's first days at Trinity Hall were unremarkable on the surface. He was shy, slightly awkward, and dressed in the plain, ill-fitting clothes of a man who cared little for appearances. His gait was clumsy, but he masked it with humor, often laughing off his own stumbles. Yet those who spoke with him sensed something extraordinary, an intensity in his eyes, a quickness of thought that outpaced conversation itself. He didn't just know physics, he saw it, as if the universe unfolded like a living map inside his mind. Mentorship under Dennis Sciama. At Cambridge, Stephen studied under Dennis Sciama, a brilliant cosmologist known for his work on general relativity and the large-scale structure of the universe. Sciama encouraged his students to ask bold questions, not just how the universe works, but why. Sciama's office became a second home for Hawking. There, the young physicist debated with peers, sketched out complex ideas on the chalkboard, and refined his thinking on black holes, singularities, and the origins of the cosmos. Sciama recalled, Stephen had a gift for asking the most profound questions in the simplest terms. He would quietly listen to a lecture, then raise a hand and ask something that cut straight to the heart of the matter. It was breathtaking, an unseen battle. But as his mind expanded, his body betrayed him more with each passing month. Simple tasks, walking across the room, buttoning a shirt, holding a pen, became daily struggles. At first, Stephen tried to hide his difficulties. He laughed off his slurred speech. He blamed fatigue when he fell. But eventually, the truth could no longer be ignored. The diagnosis of ALS hung over him like a dark star, yet Stephen made a fateful choice. He would not let the disease define him. He often said, "My expectations were reduced to 0 when I was 21. Everything since then has been a bonus." The power of visualization. As ALS weakened his muscles, Stephen's brain rewired itself. He began to rely almost entirely on mental imagery. Where other physicists wrote pages of equations, Stephen would hold vast, complex calculations entirely in his mind, turning shapes, twisting dimensions, and testing theories in an internal universe only he could see. It was during this time that Stephen's gift for visual reasoning emerged as his greatest strength. His colleagues marveled at his ability to see solutions that others could not. Love as fuel. Jane Wilde, now his fiancée, became Stephen's anchor. Where he saw obstacles, Jane saw possibilities. She encouraged him, helped him with daily tasks, and reminded him gently, persistently, that he had a destiny beyond his illness. Their love story was one of quiet heroism, late-night study sessions where Jane read to him as his hands tired, long walks where she supported him when he stumbled, shared dreams of a future that defied the doctor's predictions. They married in 1965, a simple ceremony filled with hope and defiance. The Hawking-Penrose breakthrough. In the late 1960s, Stephen began collaborating with Roger Penrose, a mathematician whose work on space-time singularities dovetailed perfectly with Stephen's interests. Together, they published the Hawking-Penrose singularity theorems, groundbreaking work showing that under general relativity, the universe must have begun as a singularity, a point of infinite density and zero volume, where space and time as we know them break down. This was no minor result. It provided theoretical evidence for the Big Bang and reshaped cosmology forever. Penrose later said, "Working with Stephen was like collaborating with a mind from another universe. His insights came from a place beyond ordinary reasoning." The wheelchair arrives. By his late 20s, Stephen could no longer walk unaided. A wheelchair became his constant companion, not a symbol of weakness, but a chariot for his mind. He customized it, mastered it, and eventually it became part of his identity. Photographs from this era show the young Hawking, thin and fragile in his chair, but with eyes that burned with curiosity and determination. Fatherhood and new purpose. Amidst the whirlwind of research, Stephen and Jane welcomed their first child, Robert, in 1967. Later, their family grew with the births of Lucy and Timothy. Fatherhood added a new dimension to Stephen's life. Despite his increasing disability, he played with his children, told them stories of the stars, and inspired them to see the universe as a place of wonder. Jane later recalled, "Stephen never let his illness define our family. Our children saw their father as brilliant and funny, not as someone disabled, but as someone extraordinary." Black holes beckon. Throughout the 1970s, Stephen's attention focused on one of the universe's most mysterious phenomena, black holes. Where others saw black holes as dead ends, places where matter disappeared forever, Stephen asked, could something escape? Could black holes radiate energy? His calculations, painstakingly worked out in his mind, led to a revolutionary idea. Black holes are not entirely black. They emit radiation. This radiation, later called Hawking radiation, would eventually cause black holes to evaporate over time. It was a stunning synthesis of quantum mechanics, general relativity, and thermodynamics, and it placed Stephen Hawking at the forefront of theoretical physics. Closing of Part 2. As the 1970s progressed, Stephen Hawking, the boy from Oxford, the student of Cambridge, the man in the wheelchair, had become something more, a cosmic thinker whose ideas challenged the very nature of reality, a husband and father who defied fate, a scientist whose mind reached places no one else dared. The stars were only the beginning. Part 3, The Diagnosis and the Fire Within. By the time Stephen Hawking was in his early 30s, his name had become known in academic circles across the world. He had stared into the heart of the universe, peered behind the curtain of time itself, and emerged with revelations that shook the foundations of cosmology. But as his intellect soared to greater heights, his body continued its slow, inevitable decline. And yet, something remarkable was happening. The more the world watched him with sympathy, the more Stephen defied their expectations, not through bitterness or despair, but through a blazing fire of will. This is the chapter where the man once given 2 years to live began building a legacy meant to outlast millennia. The turning point. ALS had now robbed Stephen of almost all voluntary movement. Walking was impossible. Eating required assistance. His speech, once only mildly slurred, had become increasingly difficult to understand. Yet his mind, his magnificent, fierce mind, remained untouched. He often said, "Although I cannot move and I have to speak through a computer, in my mind I am free." That freedom would become the core of his identity. A life of routines and rigor. Daily life for Stephen in the 1970s and 1980s followed a careful routine. Jane, his wife, carried much of the burden at home, cooking, caring for their 3 children, coordinating Stephen's assistants, and supporting his scientific work. Despite his disability, Stephen insisted on independence to a degree. He maintained a rigorous work schedule, often working late into the night. His wheelchair, adapted with technology that would become more advanced over time, gave him mobility. His assistants, many of them students or volunteers, helped him write, type, and communicate. But it was his mental discipline that stunned everyone. He could formulate entire mathematical problems, review the logic step by step, and revise them all without writing a single equation on paper. One colleague said, "Stephen didn't just work on physics. He lived in it. He saw the universe as vividly as we see trees and clouds." A scientist's resilience. What Stephen feared most wasn't death. It was being forgotten, being dismissed as someone who had potential but was silenced too early. So he fought. He lectured sometimes with the help of an assistant translating his speech, sometimes later with a computer voice synthesizer. He traveled with difficulty, but with determination. He wrote slowly at first, but soon with incredible clarity. He was becoming not only a scientist, but also a symbol. A man who had been told, "You won't make it," and replied with a roar of silence that echoed across the stars. The making of a global icon. In 1974, Stephen Hawking was elected as one of the youngest Fellows of the Royal Society, Britain's highest scientific honor. That same year, his work on black holes, particularly Hawking radiation, made international headlines. Here was a man, barely able to move or speak, rewriting the physics of the universe. Hawking radiation suggested that black holes were not eternal, that they leaked energy and could eventually evaporate. This shattered long-held beliefs and stirred fierce debates among physicists, including Leonard Susskind and even Stephen himself. This led to one of the most famous puzzles in theoretical physics, the black hole information paradox. Did information that fell into a black hole vanish forever, violating quantum mechanics, or did it somehow survive? Stephen initially argued it was lost forever. Others, including Susskind, disagreed. This wasn't just a scientific question, it was a battle for the soul of quantum theory, and Stephen was right at the center. A brief history of time begins. In the early 1980s, Stephen had a dream to write a book for the general public, a book that would explain the origin of the universe, black holes, time travel, and the nature of reality, all in language that non-scientists could understand. The idea seemed impossible. Stephen could no longer write or speak easily. He now used a computer program controlled by a small hand clicker, later replaced by a cheek muscle sensor. Composing a single sentence could take several minutes, but he was undeterred. He worked with editors, dictated passages, reviewed ideas over months and years. In 1988, after nearly a decade of work, his book was published, A Brief History of Time. No one, not even Stephen, expected what would happen next. The book that changed everything. A Brief History of Time became a phenomenon. It sold over 10 million copies, translated into more than 40 languages, and remained on the Sunday Times bestseller list for 237 weeks, a world record. Readers across the globe, scientists, artists, students, truck drivers, suddenly found themselves thinking about the Big Bang, imaginary time, singularities, and the shape of the universe. Stephen Hawking had done the impossible. He had made the most complex ideas in physics a subject of dinner-table conversation. More importantly, he had humanized science. Here was a man who could barely move, trapped in a body that betrayed him, explaining the entire cosmos to billions of people. The rise of the machine voice. In 1985, while visiting Switzerland, Stephen contracted pneumonia. Doctors performed a tracheotomy to save his life, but in doing so, he lost his voice completely. It could have ended his ability to communicate, but then came technology. Engineers built for him a speech-generating device, initially controlled with a single finger, later with a cheek muscle. It gave him a robotic voice, one that would soon become instantly recognizable around the world. Though he could have changed it later, Stephen refused. He liked the voice. It had become part of him, his trademark. He once joked, "It's American accented, but I've grown fond of it. Besides, it's smarter than most of the people I meet." Pop culture and public persona. By the 1990s, Stephen Hawking had become a global icon. He appeared on The Simpsons, starred in Star Trek, The Next Generation, and inspired countless documentaries. His image, the fragile man in the wheelchair, speaking in digital monotone about black holes and time travel, had become a symbol of brilliance and resilience. Children recognized him. Musicians referenced him. World leaders honored him. But he never let fame distract him from science. He continued to lecture, write papers, and mentor students at Cambridge. Personal struggles. Yet behind the fame and accolades, life wasn't easy. Stephen's marriage to Jane became strained. The physical and emotional demands of caring for a world-famous, severely disabled husband took their toll. Jane often felt exhausted, alone, and overlooked. In the late 1980s, the two separated and eventually divorced in 1995. It was a painful chapter, especially given how much they had shared and endured together. Stephen later married Elaine Mason, one of his nurses. Their relationship was complex and controversial. Rumors of mistreatment and emotional tension surfaced, though Stephen denied any wrongdoing or abuse. His family, especially his children, expressed concern, but Hawking maintained control over his life and choices. It was a reminder that even a mind as great as his lived with deeply human struggles. Closing of Part 3. By the dawn of the new millennium, Stephen Hawking had become more than just a physicist. He was a philosopher of the cosmos, a voice of science in popular culture, a survivor, a symbol, and, in many ways, a hero. Despite disease, pain, and heartbreak, he had continued to expand the boundaries of human understanding. The universe had tried to silence him. He responded by speaking louder than any scientist of his age. Part 4. The Black Hole Revelation and Quantum Paradox. At the heart of the universe lies a mystery so dense, so powerful, that even light cannot escape it, the black hole. For centuries, they were the stuff of science fiction and mathematical speculation. But in the hands of Stephen Hawking, black holes would become the battleground for the deepest questions in physics and the stage for his greatest intellectual duel. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, Stephen was no longer just a brilliant physicist, he was a giant in the field. Yet he was not content with past accolades. His mind remained restless, hungry, defiant. He wasn't just trying to understand black holes. He was trying to understand reality itself, the power and terror of the black hole. A black hole is the ultimate paradox, a place in space where gravity is so strong that nothing, not even light, can escape. At the center lies a singularity, a point of infinite density where the known laws of physics break down. These monstrous entities warp time and space to the extreme. But Hawking asked a question no one else dared to ask. Do black holes destroy information? In physics, information refers to the exact state of a system, the precise properties of every particle, every quantum value. According to quantum mechanics, information can't be lost. It can change form, become scrambled, but it must always be preserved. But black holes devoured everything. The birth of Hawking radiation. In a stunning 1,974 paper, Stephen made a revolutionary claim. Black holes are not entirely black. When you apply the laws of quantum field theory near the event horizon, the point of no return, you discover something astonishing. Black holes emit particles. This phenomenon, now called Hawking radiation, meant that black holes could evaporate over time. Eventually, they might even vanish completely. The implication was both brilliant and terrifying. If a black hole evaporated, what happened to the information it swallowed? Did it vanish too? If so, this would violate the fundamental laws of quantum mechanics. And thus began the most famous debate in modern theoretical physics. The black hole information paradox. Hawking insisted that information was lost in black holes, that once something passed the event horizon, its details were erased from the universe, even if the black hole eventually radiated away. This clashed violently with quantum mechanics, which demanded that information is always conserved. Other leading physicists, including Leonard Susskind, Gerard Hooft, and John Preskill, pushed back. They argued that somehow the information must be preserved, either encoded in the Hawking radiation or stored on the event horizon itself. The debate raged for decades in lectures, in papers, and even on the global stage. In 1997, Stephen made a famous bet with Preskill, arguing that information is lost in black holes. It wasn't just a theoretical argument. It was about the soul of physics. Can the universe truly forget? A new way of seeing, holography. Then came an idea that turned everything upside down. In the late 1990s, theoretical physicists proposed the holographic principle, a mind-bending concept suggesting that everything that happens inside a region of space could be described by data encoded on its surface. Applied to black holes, this meant the information about what fell in could be stored on the event horizon like a cosmic hologram. It was elegant, radical, terrifyingly strange, and it seemed to offer a solution to the paradox. Stephen resisted at first, but he was never one to let ego block reason. When the evidence mounted, he did something few scientists of his stature had the humility to do. He admitted he had been wrong. In 2004, during a lecture in Dublin, he publicly retracted his earlier position, stating that information is not lost after all. He awarded Preskill the terms of their bet, an encyclopedia of baseball. It was vintage Hawking, brilliant, playful, and fearless. The impact of the revelation. Hawking's reversal was more than a footnote. It was a landmark moment in science. It revealed something extraordinary about him, his willingness to evolve. Most scientists cling to their theories. They defend them to the end. But Stephen wasn't interested in being right. He was interested in being true. His concession didn't diminish his reputation, it enhanced it. It proved that he wasn't just a genius, but a man of deep scientific integrity, time travel and imaginary time. While the world was absorbed by black holes, Stephen ventured into even more daring territory, time itself. Could it be possible to travel through time? Could the arrow of time reverse? In his work, Hawking introduced the idea of imaginary time, time measured with complex numbers, perpendicular to real time. Imaginary time, he proposed, might smooth out singularities, such as those at the beginning of the universe. It could make the universe finite, but without boundaries like the surface of a sphere, which has no edge, but still has a definite size. These concepts were mind-expanding even among physicists. For the public, they bordered on mysticism. But Stephen wasn't trying to confuse. He was trying to stretch human perception to take us beyond the limits of intuition. The universe as a laboratory. What set Hawking apart was that he treated the entire universe as his laboratory. He didn't need a telescope. He didn't need a particle collider. He had equations, thought experiments, and an imagination that knew no gravity. He once said, "I am just a child who has never grown up. I still keep asking these how and why questions. Occasionally I find an answer." And the world listened. Quantum cosmology and the mind of God. In the 1990s and 2000s, Stephen turned his attention to one of the deepest questions of all. What caused the universe to exist? Was there a creator? A moment of divine intervention? Stephen's answer was bold. Because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. He argued that no divine being was required to spark the Big Bang, that the laws of physics were self-sufficient. This stirred controversy, especially among religious communities. But Stephen was never hostile to belief, only committed to rationality. He once said, "I believe the simplest explanation is, there is no God. No one created the universe, and no one directs our fate." Hawking's style of thinking. Stephen didn't approach problems like most physicists. His intuitive and visual approach made him a kind of hybrid, part mathematician, part philosopher, part dreamer. He often posed questions that seemed poetic, but were deeply mathematical underneath. What happens at the edge of time? Can the past be altered? Is the universe infinite or just very big? He liked to shock people into thinking differently, using humor, paradox, and plain logic. Even his appearance, the man in the chair, speaking through a robotic voice about the origins of time, added to the theatrical brilliance of his teaching. Closing of Part 4. By the early 2000s, Stephen Hawking had become more than a physicist. He was a thinker who had dared to question the very structure of existence, and in doing so had become a lighthouse for every human who had ever looked up at the stars and wondered, why? Through black holes, quantum loops, and paradoxes, he showed us that the universe is not a place of rigid laws and dark silence, but a place alive with questions, vibrating with uncertainty, and open to minds brave enough to listen. And in the middle of it all sat a man who could not walk, could not speak, but who spoke louder than anyone on earth. Part 5. A Brief History of Time and the Voice of the Cosmos. By the mid-1980s, Stephen Hawking's name was known in every major physics department around the globe. His work on black holes, singularities, and the quantum structure of space-time had made him one of the most revered minds of the modern era. But Stephen didn't just want to speak to scientists. He wanted to speak to everyone, to students, to artists, to curious minds sitting on buses or reading under dim kitchen lights. He wanted to democratize the universe, and so he began the most improbable project of his life, writing a book that would make the entire cosmos accessible to the average person. The vision of a popular book. In 1982, Stephen told his publisher that he wanted to write a short, simple book about the structure and origin of the universe, a book that explained physics without complex equations. He set one rule: no math except for e-msc quadrad, fearing that every additional equation would cut his readership in half. He hoped to explain how the universe began, what black holes are, what time really means, and whether time travel might be possible. It was an ambitious goal. But Stephen was not a man who backed down from ambition. He dictated his thoughts, edited drafts line by line with assistants, and reviewed every detail with meticulous care, often letter by letter. The result was A Brief History of Time, 1988. When the book was released, few expected it to do well. Publishers assumed it would sell a few thousand copies, mainly to university libraries and science enthusiasts. But something extraordinary happened. The book exploded. Within months, it became an international bestseller. It stayed on the London Sunday Times bestseller list for a staggering 237 weeks, a record at the time. It sold over 10 million copies, translated into more than 40 languages, and turned Hawking into an unlikely global celebrity. The public was hungry for wonder, and Stephen delivered. A new kind of voice. There was something poetic, even cinematic, about the book's success. Here was a man who could not speak, writing a book that made billions listen. His computerized voice, once seen as a limitation, became a symbol recognizable, iconic, and strangely human. In public talks, his words appeared on a screen or were read through a speech synthesizer. He paused for comedic effect. He inserted dry jokes, and he gave audiences awe. He once began a lecture by saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for my voice. My speech synthesizer was made in California, so it has an American accent." The audience roared. Stephen understood not just the science, but the performance of science. He brought the mysteries of the universe to life with style, clarity, and a touch of humor, explaining the universe to the masses. A Brief History of Time didn't just educate, it inspired. Readers around the world, from school children in India to truck drivers in Canada, began grappling with concepts like imaginary time, quantum foam, and closed universes. Stephen believed that science belonged to everyone. He didn't water it down. He didn't patronize. He simply invited people in gently but firmly to stand beside him at the edge of understanding. He often said, "My goal is simple. It is a complete understanding of the universe, why it is as it is, and why it exists at all." Becoming a global icon. The success of the book catapulted Hawking into a realm few scientists ever enter: pop culture celebrity. He appeared on The Simpsons, Star Trek, The Big Bang Theory, and was spoofed, referenced, and honored by comedians, musicians, and artists. His face, pale, fragile, lit by the glow of a computer screen, became instantly recognizable. He was invited to speak at the White House. He met with popes, presidents, and physicists alike. He was given the Commander of the Order of the British Empire, CBE, and countless honorary degrees. But even in fame, he remained grounded. He refused to stop teaching. He kept his office at Cambridge. He continued supervising students, writing papers, and pushing science forward. The man behind the voice. Despite his physical challenges, Stephen lived life with intensity. He loved music, particularly classical compositions. He enjoyed practical jokes. He had a wicked sense of humor and was known for laughing at absurd situations. He also loved science fiction. Shows like Doctor Who and Red Dwarf were among his favorites. He once said, "Science fiction gave me something to dream about when reality was too limited." And yet, for all his imagination, he never left the rigor of science behind. He insisted on logic, evidence, and consistency. He encouraged others to dream, but to test their dreams against reality. Inspiration for generations. Stephen's story began appearing in classrooms around the world. He became a symbol of overcoming adversity, a man who had every reason to give up, but who refused. He spoke often at disability forums. He advocated for accessibility in education and research. He argued that mental limitations are far rarer than physical ones and that science must welcome every type of thinker. In one interview, he said, "However difficult life may seem, there is always something you can do and succeed at. It matters that you don't just give up." Those words became a mantra for students, dreamers, and people with disabilities worldwide. A legacy of literacy. The success of A Brief History of Time sparked a revolution in popular science writing. Suddenly, publishers wanted more books like it. Stephen followed up with other works, including Black Holes and Baby Universes, 1993, The Universe in a Nutshell, 2001, The Grand Design, 2010, with Leonard Mlodinow, each book built on his goal to bridge the gap between the ivory tower and the dinner table. He didn't just want people to know about the universe, he wanted them to feel part of it. The Voice of the Cosmos. By the early 2000s, Stephen Hawking was known across every continent. His robotic voice had spoken in packed stadiums, UN conferences, television shows, and YouTube videos. But more than the voice, it was the message that echoed, that curiosity is a virtue, that the universe is worth understanding, that intelligence is not measured by mobility, but by imagination. He became, in many ways, a conscience of science, reminding researchers, students, and leaders alike that our greatest mission is to explore, to question, and to seek knowledge with humility. Closing of Part 5. In a world overflowing with noise, Stephen Hawking's voice was slow, synthesized, and deliberate, yet it carried more weight than any shout. Through the pages of a slim, equationless book, he had made the infinite accessible, the abstract personal, and the universe profoundly human. He didn't just write a book. He wrote a legacy, and in doing so, gave voice to the very stars. Part 6. Love, Loss, and the Strength to Continue. Behind the brilliance, behind the lectures and best-selling books, behind the robotic voice that inspired millions, there was something quieter, something more human. A man who loved, a man who suffered, a man who endured. For all his cosmic thinking, Stephen Hawking's life was also deeply grounded in personal struggles. His story was not just about science. It was also about the heart and the pain that can come with loving, living, and letting go. This is the chapter of love found, love tested, and love lost. And yet, through it all, Stephen never stopped reaching for the stars. Jane Wilde, The First Light. Stephen met Jane Wilde when he was just 21, a soft-spoken, determined student of languages with a love for poetry and an unshakable faith in the human spirit. Their relationship began shortly after Stephen received his ALS diagnosis, a time when he was retreating into despair, believing he had little time left. Jane, however, believed in life. She later wrote, "Stephen was full of ideas. He was charming and witty and had this enormous sense of purpose. I fell in love not just with the man, but with his mind." They married in 1965, and for over 2 decades, Jane was his closest companion, caregiver, advocate, and emotional foundation. A life of devotion and burden. Life with Stephen was inspiring but unimaginably difficult. Jane managed the household, raised 3 children, and tended to Stephen's physical needs as his condition worsened. She helped him bathe, eat, dress, and travel. All while supporting his growing scientific fame, she also endured the strain of being in the shadow of a man whose reputation consumed the space around him. As Stephen's fame grew, so did the demands from journalists, universities, publishers, and scientists. Jane remained resilient, but the emotional and physical toll began to mount. She once wrote, "I felt like I was married to 2 men, Stephen and motor neuron disease. The pressure became overwhelming." Their marriage, once rooted in love and mutual faith, began to show deep fractures. Elaine Mason, A Complicated Chapter. In the early 1990s, Stephen developed a close relationship with Elaine Mason, one of his nurses. Elaine was bold, intense, and fiercely protective of Stephen. Their connection grew quickly, and in 1995, Stephen and Jane divorced after 30 years of marriage. Soon after, Stephen married Elaine. It was a controversial and complicated period. Family members and friends voiced concern about the dynamic between them. Some questioned Elaine's influence. There were even rumors of mistreatment, none ever proven, and all firmly denied by Stephen himself. Whatever the truth, one thing was clear. Stephen wanted autonomy. He wanted to make his own choices, to live as a man, not as a patient. His marriage to Elaine lasted over a decade, but ended in divorce in 2006. A father's heart. Stephen's children, Robert, Lucy, and Timothy, grew up in a household unlike any other. They were surrounded by nurses, media, mathematicians, and scientists. Their father could not hug them, could not run or chase them, but he could speak to them of time travel, wormholes, and infinity. Lucy once said, "He didn't teach us to tie our shoes or ride a bike. He taught us to think, and that was worth more." Stephen was not a typical father. He missed family dinners, got lost in equations, and sometimes forgot birthdays. But he loved his children deeply and was proud of their accomplishments. Later in life, he would collaborate with Lucy on children's books about science, helping to pass on wonder to the next generation. Struggles behind the curtain. Fame had its price. Stephen was admired by the world, but privately he faced isolation. His condition made social interaction difficult. His fame created distance between him and those he loved most. Jane, who had sacrificed so much, struggled with depression and exhaustion. She later remarried a musician named Jonathan, a man who had supported her during Stephen's increasing absence. The children, though proud of their father, sometimes felt like they were living in the orbit of a star too bright to approach. Yet despite all this, Stephen never spoke publicly in bitterness. He once said, "I have been fortunate in almost every aspect of my life. I regret nothing." Coping with disability, as ALS progressed, Stephen lost almost all motor control. He could no longer write, turn pages, or even press a button. He relied entirely on a single cheek muscle to operate his speech-generating computer. Yet he refused to slow down. He continued lecturing, debating, writing, all with a patience that stunned everyone around him. Assistants described working with Stephen as both inspiring and exhausting. Composing a single email might take an hour. Editing a paragraph could take days. But he was relentless. He would correct typos. He would obsess over word choices. He would ask for rereads until every line was perfect. This was not a man who had surrendered to his body. The public versus the private man. To the world, Stephen was a beacon, a hero of the mind. To those close to him, he could be charming, funny, warm, but also stubborn, private, and demanding. He had little tolerance for error, especially in science. He despised mediocrity. He could be sharp with colleagues and sometimes dismissive of emotional conversations. But these were not failings. They were the coping tools of a man under unimaginable pressure. He had trained himself to focus only on what he could control. He had built emotional armor to survive a life few could endure. Humor in the darkness. One of the things that made Stephen so beloved was his humor. He joked about time travel, poked fun at his own condition, and often used irony to disarm awkward situations. In 2009, he famously threw a party for time travelers, sending out the invitation after the party took place. "No one came," he said, which proves time travel doesn't exist. He once quipped, "Life would be tragic if it weren't funny." His humor wasn't just a coping mechanism, it was a philosophy, a reminder that even in the face of despair, laughter is a form of resistance, a legacy of emotional courage. Stephen Hawking's emotional journey was as vast as his intellectual one. He loved deeply. He lost painfully. He forgave. He endured. And he kept moving forward, always forward. He was proof that genius does not shield one from heartbreak, that even the most brilliant minds ache, struggle, and sometimes stumble. But more than anything, he showed that emotional courage is just as powerful as scientific genius. Closing of Part 6. In the end, Stephen Hawking's life was not simply about the stars or time or black holes. It was about love. Love for knowledge. Love for family. Love for the infinite beauty of existence. He lived in a body that refused to move, yet his heart reached everywhere, across continents, across disciplines, and into the hearts of millions. He loved, he lost, and he lived more fully than most ever dare. Part 7. Legacy Among the Stars. As the 21st century unfolded, the name Stephen Hawking became more than a symbol of scientific brilliance. It became a beacon of perseverance, of intellect, and of the human spirit refusing to yield to limitations. He had faced death more times than most. He had lost his voice, his mobility, even parts of his family. But what he never lost, not for a moment, was his purpose. And now, in the twilight of his life, that purpose would shine brighter than ever. This is the chapter of honors, impact, and a legacy that transcended Earth itself. A voice echoing globally. Stephen continued to lecture from the United States to China, from Oxford to Chile, his computer-generated voice booming in concert halls, classrooms, and arenas. Every appearance was an event. People came not only to hear about black holes and time warps, but to witness a living miracle. He spoke of the beginning of the universe, but more than that, he embodied the triumph of the human mind. He once addressed a stadium of over 10,000 people in India, saying, "Remember to look up at the stars and not down at your feet." It wasn't just physics anymore. It was philosophy. It was guidance, advocate for science and humanity. As he aged, Stephen grew increasingly outspoken on issues facing the modern world. He warned of climate change, of overpopulation, and of the danger of artificial intelligence developing unchecked. He challenged world leaders to invest in space travel, believing that Earth might one day become uninhabitable. He said, "I don't think we will survive another 1,000 years without escaping our fragile planet." He called for ethical frameworks in technology, promoted STEM education globally, and pushed for the democratization of knowledge. He was a scientist-statesman, not a politician, but a figure of moral authority grounded in rationality and evidence. Collaborations across dimensions. Stephen never slowed his research. He collaborated with physicists like Leonard Mlodinow and Thomas Hertog, publishing influential papers well into his 70s. He revisited and revised theories, including the multiverse hypothesis, suggesting our universe might be just one of countless others in a grand cosmic foam. His work extended into string theory, quantum gravity, and even the origin of the laws of physics themselves. Colleagues noted that his mind remained as sharp as ever. What had slowed was only the method of expression, not the depth of thought. Science in pop culture. Few scientists in history have straddled both academia and pop culture as seamlessly as Stephen Hawking. His cameos became legendary. In The Simpsons, he drinks beer with Homer and challenges Lisa's logic. In Star Trek, The Next Generation, he plays poker with Albert Einstein and Isaac Newton. In The Big Bang Theory, he corrects Sheldon Cooper with a one-line mathematical zinger. These weren't just gags, they were tributes recognizing that science could be fun, that even the most abstract ideas could be shared with laughter. And Stephen loved it. He saw no contradiction between genius and humor. In fact, he saw them as companions, a figure beyond science. By the 2010s, Stephen Hawking had become one of the most recognizable people on the planet. He had won nearly every scientific award possible: the Copley Medal, the Wolf Prize, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. and countless honorary doctorates. He was knighted not officially as Sir Stephen, due to technicalities, but informally by nearly everyone. Yet through all this, he remained curious. He never stopped asking questions. In one interview, when asked what he would do if given back his voice and full mobility, he answered, "I'd use them to explore more, but even now I am still exploring." Books that shaped minds. Beyond a brief history of time, Hawking continued writing. In 2001, he released The Universe in a Nutshell, filled with vivid illustrations and complex theories made simple. In 2010, The Grand Design, co-authored with Leonard Mlodinow, argued that the laws of physics alone could explain the creation of the universe, sparking debate around the world. He also collaborated on children's science fiction books with his daughter Lucy, including George's Secret Key to the Universe, which brought space science to young readers with humor and heart. Even in his later years, Stephen was building bridges between science and story, between knowledge and wonder, the theory of everything. In 2014, the world saw a new side of Stephen Hawking, The Theory of Everything, a biographical film based on Jane Wilde's memoir, hit theaters and received critical acclaim. Eddie Redmayne's portrayal of Hawking was stunning, capturing his humor, his stubbornness, his brilliance, and his humanity. The film was not just about physics, it was about life, marriage, triumph, and loss. Stephen himself praised the film, even allowing his own voice to be used in key scenes. After watching it, he was reportedly moved to tears. The film won multiple awards, including an Oscar for Best Actor. It brought Stephen's story to a new generation and immortalized him in cinema. Inspirations to the end. In the final years of his life, Stephen continued to inspire. He addressed students via hologram, he appeared in animated documentaries, he spoke at the opening of new scientific institutions. He even joined Facebook with a post that read, "I have always wondered what makes the universe exist. Time and space may forever be a mystery, but that has not stopped my curiosity." He became a symbol not only of intellectual brilliance, but of emotional courage. To students with disabilities, he was proof that limits can be transcended. To scientists, he was a reminder that wonder must never die. To the world, he was a light in a time of confusion. Closing of Part 7. As Stephen Hawking aged, he did not dim. His body may have weakened, but his ideas grew ever more luminous, stretching across galaxies, across generations, across the very fabric of time. He lived longer, achieved more, and reached farther than anyone thought possible. Not just because he was brilliant, but because he refused to stop asking questions, and in doing so, he ensured that his legacy would not fade with the turning of the earth, but would rise with the stars. Part 8. The Final Journey and the Echo of the Mind. By the end of his life, Stephen Hawking had become one of the most iconic figures in the history of science. His robotic voice, his gentle smile, and his unshakable determination to decode the mysteries of the universe had inspired millions. But every journey, even one as extraordinary as his, must come to an end. What Stephen left behind was not just a legacy of equations and theories, but a call to think bigger, to embrace wonder, and to look at life, however hard, as a magnificent gift. This is the chapter of departure, but not disappearance. Because minds like his do not simply fade, they echo. Still working at the edge of time, even in his final years, Stephen continued to work. Though speaking a sentence took minutes and writing a paper took months, he pressed on. He debated quantum cosmology, studied the multiverse, and collaborated with physicist Thomas Hertog on papers about the origin of the universe. One of his last papers, finished mere days before his death, proposed a new theory on the shape of the universe, finite and smooth without boundaries. It challenged the popular inflation model and offered a simpler explanation rooted in the laws of quantum gravity. It was vintage Hawking, brilliant, bold, and boundary, defying, facing mortality again and again. Stephen had faced death more than once. In fact, by all accounts, he had outlived multiple life expectancies. Diagnosed at 21 and given 2 years to live, he continued defying every timeline placed before him, living until age 76. He had been through tracheotomies, respiratory failures, infections, and numerous close calls. Yet each time he returned quieter perhaps, but just as determined. He told interviewers, "I have lived with the prospect of an early death for most of my life. I'm not afraid of dying, but I'm in no hurry either." His relationship with death was not fear-based. It was philosophical. To Stephen, life wasn't about its length, it was about its intensity of purpose. The final days. In early March 2018, Stephen's health declined sharply. He was at home in Cambridge, surrounded by his children, close friends, and longtime assistants. His family reported that in his final hours, he was peaceful. His passing was quiet, dignified. On the 14th of March 2018, the world woke to the news. Stephen Hawking had died. It was poetic, almost cosmic. He had been born on the anniversary of Galileo's death, and now he had passed away on Einstein's birthday. A world in mourning. Tributes poured in from every corner of the globe. NASA called him a brilliant mind who unlocked the mysteries of the cosmos. The UK Prime Minister described him as a towering intellect. Barack Obama tweeted, "Have fun out there among the stars." Fellow scientists praised him, not just for his theories, but for his courage and clarity. Even pop culture posed. The cast of The Big Bang Theory paid tribute. Cartoonists depicted him floating among the stars, finally free of his chair. The response was global. It wasn't just the death of a scientist. It felt like the loss of a cosmic philosopher, a funeral fit for a legend. Stephen's funeral was held on the 31st of March, 2018, at Great St. Mary's Church in Cambridge, just steps away from the university where he had studied and taught for over half a century. Thousands gathered outside in silence. Inside, family and friends remembered the man who had done the impossible again and again. His ashes were later interred in Westminster Abbey, next to Isaac Newton and Charles Darwin, an honor reserved for the greatest minds in British history. On the stone, here lies what was mortal of Stephen Hawking. And yet, even that was not the end. His voice beamed into space. In a symbolic gesture, Stephen's voice, encoded with a message of peace and hope, was beamed into space by the European Space Agency, aimed at the nearest black hole, 3,500 light-years away. It was a message to the universe from one of Earth's finest thinkers. A final echo. The ideas live on. Stephen's scientific work continues to ripple through physics. His theories on black hole evaporation are now central to quantum gravity research. His singularity theorems still frame our understanding of the Big Bang. His ideas about information paradoxes have driven decades of breakthroughs. His visualization of the universe as a hologram continues to inspire quantum theorists. But more than that, his approach to thinking remains his true gift. Visual, bold, imaginative, unafraid, asterisk, asterisk. He didn't just answer questions, he asked new ones. Stephen's real legacy. More than any equation or paper, Stephen's legacy is this. He taught us that limits are often illusions, that a body can be still while a mind moves galaxies, that despair can be met with wonder, that life, no matter how constrained, can still be a celebration. He once wrote, "Look up at the stars and not down at your feet. Be curious, and however difficult life may seem, there is always something you can do and succeed at." Those words are now carved on classroom walls, printed on posters, and whispered in moments of doubt. Not the end, but the beginning. Stephen Hawking's journey ended in 2018. But the story of what he taught us is only beginning. Future physicists will build on his work. Future explorers will carry his name into space. Future children, curious, defiant, bright-eyed, will be inspired by his example. And when they ask, "What is a black hole?" or "What came before time?" or "Can I be a scientist too, even if I'm different?" the answer, somewhere in the stars, will be, "Ask, dream, and keep going just like Stephen." Closing of Part 8. Stephen Hawking never walked a step. He never raised his voice. He never reached out his hand. But in his chair, with his voice machine, and with his brilliant mind, he touched all of us. His life is not a tragedy, it is a triumph. Not just over disease, or physics, or time, but over the very idea that there are limits to what a person can be. He was not just a scientist. He was a star. And he shines on. Part 9. The Laws of Hawking, Genius, Humor, and Humanity. By the time Stephen Hawking left this world, he had become something rare, not just a man of science, but a symbol, a force of nature, a reminder of what humanity is capable of when the mind is liberated from the body's boundaries. To understand his true legacy, one must go beyond his physics and formulas. Stephen Hawking lived by a personal set of unwritten laws, principles, that governed how he thought, how he worked, and how he lived. They were not printed in textbooks. They were etched in the way he faced life. Let us now explore the laws of Hawking, laws that reveal the soul behind the science. Law 1. The universe is knowable. Stephen never doubted that the universe could be understood. Yes, it was complex. Yes, it was vast. But it was not unknowable. He said, "The greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance. It is the illusion of knowledge." He saw science as the ultimate act of hope, a way to pull back the veil of mystery and peer into the machinery behind existence. For him, every black hole, every particle, every equation was part of a grand puzzle, one worth solving. This belief gave him purpose. It fueled his research. It gave him a reason to wake up each day, even when his body failed him. Law 2. Intelligence is the ability to adapt. Stephen's genius did not lie only in mathematics. It lay in adaptation. Most scientists use pen and paper. He used thought. Most people speak with their voice. He used a cheek muscle. Most complain when things get hard. He reimagined the limits. He once said, "Intelligence is the ability to adapt to change." Stephen lived this truth. He took what the world gave him, ALS, a motionless body, a silenced voice, and transformed it into a catapult of imagination. Law 3. Humor is essential. Despite everything he endured, Stephen laughed. A lot. He loved satire, he had a soft spot for British comedies, and enjoyed telling inappropriate jokes with perfect timing through his synthesizer. His humor disarmed people. It softened the weight of his condition, and it reminded the world that even a theoretical physicist could enjoy a well-placed punchline. He once said, "Life would be tragic if it weren't funny." His sense of humor wasn't just a coping mechanism, it was a philosophical stance. It said, "I see the absurdity, I see the pain, but I choose to laugh anyway." Law 4. Don't waste time on self-pity. Stephen hated pity. He did not want to be admired for surviving. He wanted to be admired for thinking. He once told a student, "We are all different. There is no such thing as a standard human being, but we all share the same human spirit." He didn't ask for sympathy. He asked for ideas. His work ethic was staggering. Assistants described him as being impatient, demanding, and relentless, not because he was cruel, but because he expected brilliance from himself and from others. His time was precious. He treated it accordingly. Law 5. Keep asking questions. Perhaps the most fundamental law of Hawking was this: be curious. He never stopped asking questions. Not when his muscles stopped working, not when critics challenged his theories, not even in his 70s, when most scientists retire. He asked, "What happens at the edge of a black hole? Can time have a beginning? Is the universe infinite, or does it loop back on itself? Will we ever understand it all?" Even in his final months, he was working on multiverse theory and whether God was necessary to explain existence. His entire life was a question mark, and he embraced it with joy. Law 6. Reach beyond yourself. Stephen didn't just want to understand the universe, he wanted to share that understanding. He could have stayed in academia. He could have spoken only to elite physicists. But he chose to speak to children, to non-scientists, to the world. He simplified without dumbing down. He explained without arrogance. He democratized knowledge. A Brief History of Time wasn't a science book, it was a gift, a bridge. He once said, "My goal is simple. It is a complete understanding of the universe, and to share that understanding." Law 7. Disability is not inability. Stephen Hawking redefined what it meant to live with a disability. He didn't just survive ALS, he thrived with it. He was living proof that mind trumps matter, that a wheelchair does not limit a soul, and that communication is not defined by sound. He became an icon, not of weakness, but of limitless thought. His example changed how people saw disability, not as a curse, but as a different kind of journey. Law 8. We are part of something vast. Stephen often said, "We are just an advanced breed of monkeys on a minor planet of a very average star, but we can understand the universe. That makes us something very special." He did not believe in destiny or divine purpose, but he believed in meaning, in the beauty of discovery, in the duty to explore, and in the joy of knowing our place in the cosmos. He saw the stars not as unreachable points of light, but as invitations, and he urged others to reach back. Hawking's rules for living. In 2010, during an interview, Stephen summarized his life philosophy into 3 simple pieces of advice. Look up at the stars, not down at your feet. Never give up work. Work gives you meaning and purpose. If you're lucky enough to find love, don't let it go. It wasn't a formula for physics. It was a manual for life. And people listened. From genius to myth. As his reputation grew, Stephen crossed into the realm of myth. The man who couldn't walk, but traveled through space-time. The voice machine that could quote Shakespeare or Hawking radiation. The scientist who danced between black holes and comic books. He was made into action figures. Appeared in cartoons. Was studied in classrooms. And, more than anything, he stayed human. He laughed. He made mistakes. He loved and lost. He struggled. He kept going. Closing of Part 9. Stephen Hawking may have unraveled the laws of black holes. He may have questioned the origin of time. He may have dreamed of multiverses and elegant mathematical frameworks. But perhaps his most profound legacy lies in the laws he lived by. He taught us that a mind is not confined by the body, that a question can be more powerful than an answer, that the human spirit, when paired with curiosity, is boundless. The stars were not the end of his journey. They were his home. Part 10, Beyond Time, the eternal flame of Hawking. Some lives end with silence. Others echo. Stephen Hawking's life was the latter, not just a series of lectures and publications, but a message to the universe. He showed that the boundaries of the mind are far wider than the body, that wonder is more powerful than despair, and that time, though finite for us all, cannot contain a soul determined to leave a mark on eternity. Now, as we close this long journey, we ask, what remains when the voice goes quiet? The answer in Hawking's case is everything, the torchbearers of thought. Stephen's impact is felt in every corner of modern science. His students now run research institutes. His ideas are tested in quantum computers. His questions are written on whiteboards from Cambridge to Caltech. The black hole information paradox continues to be a central issue in quantum gravity. His concept of imaginary time is used in modern cosmological models. His idea that the universe could create itself from nothing still sparks fiery debates. He did not give us all the answers, and perhaps that's the point. He made us better at asking. Global education and inspiration. Stephen's reach went far beyond scientists. He inspired a generation of writers who learned that science could be poetic, teachers who found new ways to explain the infinite, filmmakers who saw beauty in complexity, disabled thinkers who finally saw themselves represented in genius. Children wrote him letters. Dear Professor Hawking, I want to be a black hole scientist like you. Some went on to do exactly that. He turned theoretical physics, once an obscure, intimidating field, into something that felt personal, even magical. He reminded us that cosmic questions are for everyone. The digital immortality. Hawking's speeches, interviews, and lectures are archived forever online, a library of thought stretching across time zones and languages. His voice, though artificial, is now eternal. It lives in documentaries, voice simulations, audiobooks, podcasts, and even in AI recreations that keep his tone and cadence alive. The man who once feared being forgotten is now more accessible than ever. His final message to humanity. One of Stephen's last public messages, shared shortly before his passing, was this: remember to look up at the stars and not down at your feet. Try to make sense of what you see and wonder about what makes the universe exist. Be curious. It wasn't a formula. It wasn't a theory. It was a challenge and a gift. The posthumous works. Even after death, Stephen had more to say. In October 2018, his final book was published, Brief Answers to the Big Questions. It tackled the questions he felt mattered most. Is there a God? Can time travel exist? Will artificial intelligence outsmart humanity? Should we colonize space? It was vintage Hawking, direct, fearless, fascinating. It sold millions of copies and reaffirmed what we always knew, that Stephen wasn't finished inspiring the world, even after his voice had gone silent. Memorials across the planet and beyond. After his death, Stephen's name was immortalized in ways few scientists have ever experienced. His wheelchair is displayed at the Science Museum in London. A memorial stone lies in Westminster Abbey, between Newton and Darwin. His voice was broadcast into space by the European Space Agency. An asteroid was named 7672 Hawking in his honor. Multiple academic chairs, lecture series, and fellowships now bear his name. His impact was not just etched in stone, but woven into the very language of physics, popular culture, and philosophy. Stephen Hawking in the cultural conscience. Stephen became a myth while still alive, a rarity in the scientific world. He was a real-life superhero, a man whose mind traveled where no body could. His life was dramatized in films. His words were printed on posters. His ideas made their way into political debates, graduation speeches, and space missions. People who had never read a physics paper knew who he was, not because of pity, but because of respect. He was not the man in the wheelchair. He was the mind that touched the universe. A human legacy. Stephen loved the stars, but he also loved Earth, its music, its culture, its people. He admired Beethoven, laughed at Monty Python, enjoyed curry and wine, and delighted in absurd British humor. He celebrated his 75th birthday with a massive gathering in Cambridge, complete with balloons, champagne, speeches, and jokes about time travel. He lived fully, honestly, fearlessly. His legacy is not perfection, it is persistence. He showed us what it means to keep going, even when the world says you can't. The final equation. Stephen once said, I have noticed that even people who claim everything is predetermined and that we can do nothing to change it still look before they cross the road. It was his way of saying we have choices. We can believe or ignore. We can wonder or worry. We can look down or look up. Stephen chose wonder, and in doing so, he became a mirror of what is best in us. Eternal flame. Some people live quietly and leave ripples. Stephen Hawking lived defiantly and left constellations. He redefined what it means to be alive. He reimagined what a mind can do. He reignited our belief that the universe is not just observable, it's knowable. And even now, as telescopes scan the skies, as satellites fly, as students study physics for the first time, his flames still burn. Closing of Part 10. This is not the end, because every question Stephen asked remains. Because every child who stares at the night sky still feels what he felt. Because every whisper of radiation from a black hole still echoes with his name. Stephen Hawking died, but his mind did not vanish. It lives in questions, in wonder, and in every eye that dares to look up.